Hello and welcome to the Crack a Can Talk Show. Today we are joined by David Taylor. He's a Scottish cartoonist and an author, and he's bringing out a new graphic novel called Wild Nature. Thanks so much for coming on, man.
Happy to. Well, thanks for inviting me.
No, thank you. So the first question we always do on this show is just, what are you drinking for the interview today?
It is Brewdog's Dead Pony Club.
Good choice, man.
So I don't get to drink beer an awful lot at the moment, just because I just be drinking every night the way things are. And I'd be drunk all the time. But I figured, I was going to pop out to the shops, get myself a treat. So that works out. What are you having?
I'm having a wee Innocent Gun lager beer.
Oh, nice.
So you've actually, on this show, I only try and drink Scottish beers. So you've actually joined that. So that's pretty nice of you, without me even telling you.
I'm glad that I fell into that path. It's not a huge amount of beers I drink anymore, and that's not like for any bad reasons. That's one of those weird things that I drink a lot of rum instead.
So I wanted to get you on. Basically, I was looking through Kickstarter and I seen yourself, and just the graphics just grabbed me straight away. So then I watched the wee video, and I was just like, "This is exactly the sort of guy I want on this show." So, your stuff just looks so good, man. It just beer caught my eye straight away.
So I would normally have thought the video would be like one of these me sort of gibbering away, and then I have to carefully edit it together to make it sound coherent. But yeah, no, it was like, actually, as always, I've got the books were sitting in front of me. Everyone was taking photos of them. So I think the thing you probably saw was that.
It was.
Yeah.
So I want to get into your influences and stuff, but I don't know if you're a big video game player at all.
I am. So for Wild Nature, there was like a whole bunch of stuff I'd been kind of watching or reading, and so some of it was like there's a comics, like one called American Flag, 2000 AD and Dread and stuff like that. And then I was watching The Running Man. I usually end up watching The Running Man once a year for some reason.
It's just
it's just one of those things. I don't think it's not the greatest film. It's got lots of things wrong with it, but I just really enjoy it. And I enjoy the whole thing of it. Yeah, it's just fun. And it's like one of Arnie's best 80s roles, because it's just like pure Arnold.
Yeah.
So I remember because I was watching that, and then probably the game if people looking at would recognize, it's Hotline Miami.
Yeah.
So there's tons of stuff. I was obsessed with that game for years.
Brilliant game.
Yeah, and I was all into the lore, and I was like, which is for such a short game, it's like remarkable and adept.
Yeah.
and I've just been thinking for ages of it. I'd like to do something that had that 80s color aesthetic, and it's really bright and garish, and the animal masks just appealed to me anyway, because it was like something I've never tried to draw before, and it was if I was going to do like lots of really violent action, I thought, well, how can I make this a little bit less grating when it happens?
Right. Okay. So it's almost like,
sorry.
So it's almost like a contrast then, like between like the kind of violence to have like obviously animal masks look quite scary, but by nature they're quite cute. So it's like it's just that kind of juxtaposition between the two of them. Yeah,
it was, so it kind of gave me something to play with, and it just looked different to anything else I'd sort of seen. And I thought, well, there's been comics that have got like animal mass in them, some stuff like another Scottish kind of comics creature, John Lees, does the Sync comics, which have got a guy with a fox mask.
Right. Okay.
And so there was like stuff like that where you're like, well, that's some crossover, and people might look and think, oh right, it's in the same sort of vein. It's not entirely, but. So I've been looking at a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah.
I for ages been thinking about doing something that was really kind of pulpy and a bit silly.
Right.
Okay. My plan was, right, I'll do a short 72-page thing, and it'll be in color, and it'll be really like a trashy 80s movie. And it was like, my idea was like, imagine if John Wick had starred Denzel Washington. And that was like how the idea started in my head, and I thought I'd just play with that. And then I started working on it, and like almost inevitably, I'm really bad at doing anything simple. And I started working with an editor for the first time, and I remember I sent her my story outline, and she was like, "Well, this is all right, but do you not maybe want to do something else with it?" And I was like, "Now you've said that, I think I probably should." And so now it's like gone.
Was this the first time you worked with an editor then? Like with the
yeah. So I thought this story I wanted to try something more with, and I wanted to be a bit more, at the very least, take the pressure off myself. So I thought, well, I'll work with an editor. That'll definitely help me. It did, and it's been great, and I love working with her. But I said the first thing that she sort of came up with was like, maybe this should be bigger. I know it is bigger. So it went from 72 pages, and probably when it's done, it'll be like 240.
Wow, because
So,
it's a
so
series you're doing this time, isn't it? This is like your first time that's more than just one book.
yeah, exactly. So it's I wasn't wanting to do like in single issues or anything because I thought that would just take forever to kind of crowdfund, and
Yeah.
it's quite hard to kind of do it monthly or something. But I figured if I did the whole 200 odd pages, it would take me like a year and a half, 2 years.
Yeah.
I was like, well, that's a long time to go without releasing anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I just thought, well, what can I do? I'll break it up into 3 sections. And it means I feel a lot less pressure to get it done fast.
Yeah.
But it also gives me an opportunity, kind of just to kind of promote it better, I think, and build from there, give people a chance to get used to it and see it around and jump on at different points.
So see, obviously now you're working with Claire. Like, does that, and like we're saying, this is a series this time. So does that mean you can edit kind of as you're going, like how you added those 2 extra pages? Like, will you still be doing that for the other books instead of like, obviously when you do just one book, it's kind of finished and then it's out there?
I hope not, because it was quite stressful.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, I've missed something. I've approached it completely differently. So whereas before I would think I had things solved, and then I would get halfway through, go, actually, I've got a problem now, or I've got a better idea of how I did something. With Claire, I'll share kind of a story outline, and we figure stuff out in each volume.
Yeah.
And then I'll do a draft script, I'll do some thumbnails of each page. And then I'll just basically say, what do you think? And we'll talk it through. And sometimes I'll come up with something as a result, or she'll suggest something. Yeah. And a few times that I've added pages, there's a sequence in volume 1 which I hadn't planned on doing. And I was talking about the whole character. There's a whole history of stuff that's happened well before the story begins. And I was trying to show some of the relationships, and I had this idea for the sequence set in Thailand.
Right, okay.
And what was in my head, I just had a dream, which was basically these people in with these dark blue lights and pink neon on the sides. And I was like, I want to do something like that. I want to do something with that look, and the rain coming down, and that sort of very heavy shadow you see in Frank Miller's Sin City books and things like that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And so that was
exactly what you mean.
Yeah. So that was the goal. It was just like, so I thought, well, what can I tell in that moment? What would be the thing? Just came up with it, did it, and then it kind of went into the book. So I've got more flexibility with this approach. But there's also, I want to balance it that this is a really character-led piece. So there's like all the genre stuff on top, and there is some kind of big action, but I wanted to give myself the space to let the characters grow and breathe. So that's another good thing about this approach. I can sit there, have my outline all figured out, and I could just go ahead and just work through it. But then I'll sometimes be sitting there, just suddenly go, actually, that's interesting, or I want to spend more time with this character, and just go, and I don't lose anything by doing it.
Actually, there was something you said. I found a quote from yourself. It was, as much as I love violent movies, I don't think the creators can tell them with the same laissez-faire as they might have in the 80s and 90s. Which I thought is spot on, and it was actually something I wanted to ask you about. Like, obviously, how you're saying your story is very character driven, but it's also violent. And I don't know if you might agree or disagree, but I feel like in a lot of more mainstream culture anyway, especially film, that people are kind of replacing stories with gore. Like if you look at the latter day Saw films, or maybe something like Hostel, like the kind of gore replaces the storyline, whereas I feel like you're kind of going back to the kind of older days where, like, yes, there is gore and that is important, but it's also still great storytelling, and that doesn't take away from it. Like, that's not the main selling point. Like, your characters are deep, and there is like kind of things to be thought about when reading it. It's not just, oh, here's a bunch of really cool fatalities. Or
well, that's got its own fun as well.
But
it does. It gets one. Basically, it was that everything I've written has been, into some way, it's about something that's been on my mind. And I like genre stuff generally, and I like all the kind of the big, and I like the silliness of it. And I say, I watched The Running Man, and there's a lot, like the genre thrills and stuff. I think though, what I kind of landed on was that it makes a lot of those films, they don't really have an awful lot of substance after that.
Yeah. So
I found it quite hard. Like, so The Running Man's probably, actually, I use it as an example because I like it. I've read the book it's based on, and whatever you're thinking, Stephen King, that's fine. But he's got pretty well drawn characters in most of his stuff. And what the film lacks is that there's no kind of real sense of people growing or changing.
Yep.
And it makes the film fun, but it doesn't really give you an awful lot of nourishment to kind of think about. And not every film has to do that. But when I was kind of, I had to kind of ask myself when I was doing The Grave about why I was writing stuff that was so violent and what I was really trying to do with it. And what it's not, I mean, I'm not violent in the slightest, and I find violence really unpleasant and terrifying all the time.
Yeah.
I've made it a real passion in my life to avoid it.
Yeah.
And I think that I quite like that there's things being violent is an emotional extreme, and it lets you express other things. And when I was writing The Grave, I had this idea that the phrase was that damaged people do damage. And this was always the thing I kept coming back to. And it's even the same in Wild Nature, is that no one is violent just because. And for the people that do seem to enjoy it, I think we would largely agree there's something a bit wrong with them. So I always wanted to kind of at least examine if someone is violent, is there a choice that they think, well, I'm not going to be that way anymore? Or is it? And the whole thing of Wild Nature is that the main character Swan has largely rejected that by the time the story begins. But he's not realized, he's not kind of come to terms with who he is. And, you know, the Wild Nature thing's pretty on the nose. It's, you know, what is actually kind of underneath everything. And it doesn't obviously get resolved. There's 2 more volumes to go. So don't want to deal with that just straight out of the gate. But yeah, I just don't think I don't think you can approach violent fiction in the way that you did. I think if you're going to do it, you have to be more thoughtful about what it means and what it means to the characters. And I think just also, it just gives you much more to tell a story about.
It just makes for a much more substantial story, doesn't it? Like we're saying with these like kind of not cheap tricks, but like kind of the gory side of things, it makes for great viewing maybe the first time you watch it. But then it's not, like you're saying, that kind of nourishment. It's not the sort of thing you would go back to over and over again when you know what's coming. But also, we've spoken about Wild Nature, but we haven't actually said what it's about. If you want to tell the audience what your new comic's actually about.
I'm really, really bad for that.
Not so bad.
It's set in it's kind of a slightly alternate timeline, a wee bit in the future. And the main character Swan is someone who created this death sport called Wild Nature, along with his former partner Jack. But he decides that he doesn't want to do it anymore. He doesn't want people to know him purely as a murderer. He wants to have more of a life and not be part of that. But what he discovers is that getting away from who he was is almost impossible, and it's all people know him for. And the history of what he's done and the things, whether it's in the game or in his former life before it, which is, you know, it's a very violent existence, is coming back to him in all sorts of ways. And he's struggling just to face up to who he is in the face of all those things. So that's a fairly broad thing, which doesn't quite cover all the weird animal mask stuff and why I did that, which was like the most obvious pun on earth. I'll call it Wild Nature, and they can all have masks, but animals, brilliant. Which was the depth of that thinking, to be honest. So, but it's been, you know, it's fun. It was a fun thing. So that's kind of the broad story. I'm into volume 1's out. You can buy it digitally. I've got a very limited set of print copies left. That's a hardback, and when I reprint, it'll be in softback, but these are the only ones that'll be in hardback. Yep. And then volume 2 will hopefully be done end of this year.
Oh, brilliant.
And it'll be back on Kickstarter, and then volume 3 will follow sometime in 2022.
Nice. So before on this show, we've had like bands come on, and we've kind of spoke about the importance, or maybe the not so importance, of having record labels. And I feel like writers like yourself, I feel like a very similar thing can be said about publishers. Obviously, you're saying you published your first book. Do you think things like Kickstarter are a good opportunity for, you're saying, like yourself, to put your own work out there without the kind of backing or the need to kind of go and beg publishers to give you the time of day?
It works for someone like me who's a complete control freak.
Right, okay.
And you know, and truthfully, you know, I've always kind of, you know, I had a long break from doing art, and then when I came back to it, I've had to kind of really redevelop a lot of my skills and try and get back to those things. So I was also working on the basis that I'd like to learn and improve, and so that's like some fundamentals. And I just wouldn't even know where to start with pitching publishers or what I would be kind of doing. And I was trying to learn a craft and figure stuff out. And I'm maybe at the level now where, because of comfort, you know, it's up to other people how good they think I am. But in terms of would I be able to go and pitch someone for work? But then I like telling my own stories, and I like doing stuff the way I want to do it. And if someone was to come to me and say, "Oh, we'd love to publish some of this," that'd be fine. Obviously, I wouldn't complain, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't really want to be in a position of going and begging for attention. But certainly, so that works for me, and I like it's given me an opportunity to build something of a fan base and talk to people directly. And you don't necessarily get that when you go with a publisher. But I think for other creators, it maybe doesn't have the same value. They don't want to be thinking about it. If you're purely an artist, you know, you're better off going to a publisher trying to find other writers to work with. But it's been great. I mean, it's been great. There's been tons of stuff I've seen on Kickstarter that I wouldn't have probably seen in a normal comic shop. I've met lots of really cool people, and I've seen some really cool books I wouldn't have experienced. And there's been a few creators that I'm like are absolutely amazing, and I think they would be terrible if they were working for a mainstream publisher.
Right. Okay.
I think it would suck all the life out of their work. I like people working in the weird spaces and doing stuff no one else is doing, and they might not get the same audience, but truthfully, you will make more. This is very capitalist, but you'll make more money if you can build your audience in Kickstarter and sell direct to them than you ever will long term working for a publisher, in my view.
Yeah.
So
it's really interesting because it's like all these kind of different industries, but like almost the same set of rules apply to all of them. Like there's 3 of us who work on this show, and we're all kind of music based. So most of my references are like record labels and stuff like that. But it's just interesting. Like I see, like we had a game developer on, so we spent the whole time talking about the kind of rise and rise of indie games. And I feel like self-published work is kind of on the up and up. Like it is being treated really well. It's not just like, oh, this person put this out themselves on to the next big thing. Like, and I feel like music's in a very similar stance now as well.
Yeah, for comics, digital distribution's helped a lot because you can, you know, it's a much lower barrier to entry to put stuff out. But for books themselves, the quality of digital printing is massively improved. You know, I mean, my book, you know, Wild Nature's a print run was only like 150 copies, and the cost was really quite low considering it was in hardback and it was a full-size comic. And yet, you know, I don't have to, you know, what comes in looks amazing. It's not like, you know, 5 years ago, even some of the stuff you would see coming from a digital print would look absolutely dreadful and be badly bound. They just do it really cheap because they're like, comics people, they'll have no taste. And a lot of the time, you know, we didn't have, you know, comic traders didn't have the money to go and spend on that. But I mean, and that helped, you know, just one last thing on that, which was, you know, when the copies of Wild Nature started landing with backers, everybody has commented on how good the hardback looks.
One of the first comments I seen on your comic was how good the quality is. Like the first comment I seen. So it just shows you're spot on. And it's, people like appreciate that though. Like I used to work in a comic book shop. And you could tell the difference between cheaply made, and that's obviously no fault of the creator, but obviously maybe just couldn't afford to have better quality, but you could tell the difference. And again, to relate it back to like music in my field would be the rise of vinyl. Like people are buying vinyls again. Like people care about the art book in the middle, and they want the lyric sheets, and they want your like. I still sit and read bands' thank you notes to see what bands they're listing, so I can go and listen to them next. And I feel like comics are very similar. It's a very physical medium. Like it's tangible. You want to hold it in your hand.
Yeah, and I mean, Joe, you're saying there was sometimes it wasn't the fault of the creator. Sometimes it is. And I wouldn't want to point fingers at anybody because like most of the people I have kind of backed obviously do really nice stuff. But you do see some people, and this is not their fault. Is that they maybe don't know anything about printing, or they don't really think about paper quality and stuff like that, or they go to who they think's the cheapest option for their printer, and they don't think about, but they really know what they're doing, or are they just giving you the quickest stock they can slap it on for you? Sometimes that's got a charm, actually. You know, if the book suits that kind of aesthetic. But and that'd be my advice to anybody: is try and do something in black and white, because it looks different to anything else out there. And truthfully, people are trying to compete with like, you know, DC and Marvel and Image, and you're never gonna. So to me, it's just like, why bother? And it's like, why not just do something that is your thing? But that's just me. That's just, I've got kind of odd aesthetic taste in that area. So
no, I think that makes sense. Like, yeah, I would rather be very good in my own niche than try and compete with people that you're inevitably going to lose to because you don't have the same funds or same resources that these people have.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was something I wanted to ask you about, actually, because Wild Nature. Yes.
Sorry, your question. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Wild Nature's your first comic in color, isn't it?
Yeah.
And was that like a? Obviously, we were kind of touching on your influence and stuff earlier, but was that like a specific choice, or like this story needs to be in color Like, was it ever kind of debate to have it in black and white, or was it always going to be color to you?
There was a brief moment it was going to be black and white because I didn't know if I could be bothered. I was quite scared of working in color.
Right. Okay.
I went to art school, and it was always something I always just imagined myself as I liked working in ink.
Right, okay.
And I liked being in black and white. I liked the high contrast, and I hadn't really thought about color because there was just nothing ever. There was never something that spoke to me that this needs to be this way. But because I had this whole kind of Miami 80s aesthetic in my head, and one of the very first drawing I did for Wild Nature was what became Swan, standing at the top of this kind of stairwell looking down, and everything was in these kind of really bright pastel type colors.
Right. Okay.
It was like the sea green and pink and things like that, and I was like, well, that's kind of cool. And so everything, I started thinking, well, maybe I'll try and experiment with it, and I'll see how I get on. And my experiments were terrible. I made no bones about it. They looked awful, and I was just like, I don't know what I'm doing here. And so I kind of thought about it for a while, and I was like, well, maybe I could do it in black and white, but I'll do maybe the covers in really bright garish color. And I was like, nah, I'm just copping out, and I'm being lazy, and I'm letting my nerves about not being good at this get in the way of getting better.
Right. Okay.
So I thought aesthetically it needs this. I was looking at obviously like Hotline Miami, those big bright hot colors. I was like,
yeah,
I can't do this story and not, make at least that visual cue of what's in that. But that's what I loved about it so much. When I first saw it, was like, oh my God, this is like my retinas are being burned out. But I love it. Please do it more. And it was also the more I thought was that I knew I was going to do some really seriously violent moments. And the impact of using color to do another part of the storytelling, to make it kind of pop more, or to make it feel scarier, or make it feel more aggressive in some occasions.
Yeah.
There's some stuff, in the book when you see more or less a full match from the Wild Nature sport about halfway through the story, and it's this incredibly hot pink in the scene where all the violence finally goes down.
Right. Okay.
And
that's awesome.
It needs that color to make that so striking. And by the time I was doing the last maybe 20 pages, I got really aggressive with the sort of colors I was using and did weird things. And that was when I was like, right, that's my identity in this. There'll be some stuff that's a little bit more sober, and it's a bit, the beginning of each volume will be a little bit more sober to bring you into the color palette each time.
Right.
Because
Okay.
like, if the first thing you land on is this bright pink page, you're like, maybe this isn't for me. This might not be my book. It's like a child's like throwing their crayons all over it. But so it was definitely something I wanted to. I'd been thinking about it for a while when I thought this story needs it. But that was when the story was meant to be 72 pages in total, and now it's going to be over 200. I'm like, I don't know if that was a good idea. But I'm fine. I'm fine with it because it is. I'm still learning and I'm still figuring it out. But people have responded really well to the color, and a few people have actually said that it's really stood out for them. The use of it. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm getting something right. So I'll keep working on that.
Well, it's pretty much exactly what I said. Like, think how many things are on Kickstarter and your picture jump out to me, probably because it was a bright pink image of a bunny holding a knife.
Yeah.
It really caught my eye straight away.
Yeah.
Also, we spoke about the Running Man, but a quote I seen about your novel was that it's Moneyball meets the Running Man, which I think is spot on, man. That is two incredible films.
I forgot that. That's quite a good one.
I think the thing that's cool about your comic is even if you're not a sports fan, that doesn't put you off. Like me personally, I'm a huge sports fan. Like I love sports so much. So I think maybe I might get like that out of it as well. But even if it's someone who couldn't care less about sports, I think there's just so much going on that doesn't kind of put you off. Like what kind of what I'm saying, like the characters and stuff. Like it's not just there's this killer sport and that's it.
Yeah, and it wasn't. I mean, the sport thing was just a handy way of like why would people be doing this sort of stuff? And there was different points where there was like, you might have seen there's like a book, the most dangerous game, and then there's things like Hard Target and stuff where it's that kind of street hunting type thing. And that was one of the ideas for a little bit. I was like, can I do something with that? But it doesn't really give you an awful lot of space to talk about any of the social elements of sport. Or I'm a big boxing fan. So I'm a huge boxing fan, and one of the things I was there's lots of little references to boxing. There's like you briefly see Sugar Ray Leonard on Swan's wall in one of the scenes. So there's things like that. And what was really the thing in my head was there's this combination of like when Muhammad Ali retired or was kind of forced to retire because he was not doing well, and Larry Holmes became the next heavyweight champion, and Larry Holmes was always full of resentment about that he never got the love and the praise because he was kind of a surly character and he wasn't as charismatic, and people always wanted to see Ali come back, and so that was one thing that just I thought was quite an interesting thing to play with, and that's the dynamic between Swan and Fox, is that Swan is the Muhammad, although he's not like him, he's more of a Tyson type in terms of how he approaches things.
But he's that kind of personality.
Yeah, he's this kind of, well, he's not as talkative as Tyson was in his prime. He's got the same sort of surly, and it's the whole thing always be killing is like, Tyson's seek and destroy mentality when he was, in his prime. And so sport just gives you lots of really easy reference points for people, and it kind of sets out clear boundaries in competition, and it's an obvious conflict. And so that was one of the things it was helpful, and it gave me a really cool framework to explore this idea to play with. But the other goal was that really it's not about the sport ultimately. The wild nature is the name of the sport, but it's nothing to do with sport really when it comes down to it. That's just a great visual and exciting way of bringing the conflicts to the fore and having a center point. But what I was more interested in was this kind of overarching character drama of all these people that are just struggling to acknowledge who they are and who they want to be, and they feel either that they've disappointed themselves or they've disappointed others. And Swan, more specifically, he's got a lot of stuff around mental health issues. There's this black voice that speaks to him, and it'll be kind of obvious in the second volume where that's coming from and who it is. But I think everybody's got that in them. There's always that kind of doubting voice that says all the things you really wish you didn't have to believe about yourself. And I thought that works well in a sports context too. Got that sense out, and and I'm really good enough to compete. And speaking as someone who wasn't to the great sports school, I was fine with accepting that black voice, so that I'll find something else to be good at.
That kind of applies to Swan as well. Like a main theme from the book is that kind of mistaken identity. Like I feel like that really does apply to real life people like that. And you're saying there's obviously like a little bit of yourself in these characters. Like I think that's really interesting. Yeah,
I think Swan was. I wouldn't, obviously I'm not. I'm not down the path of where he is in his kind of identity, kind of confusion. But one of the things with him is that he wants to be seen as this part of society. He wants people to kind of appreciate him for more than he is. And he's a thoughtful person. But I think there was a thing for me when I was a few years back. I had a bad habit of not really acknowledging my feelings about stuff. And I would replace it with like other stuff, or I'd joke it off, and like a lot of people. And it was, kind of, it was a weird sort of being macho. Nothing bothers me, you can't hurt me. And there's a lot of that goes on in Swan, is that, and actually he's just this deeply sad, lonely guy. And I was drafting something last night for volume 2 where he's basically saying, this is not a spoiler in any way, so is that he realizes that one of the characters he meets at the end of volume 1 is probably the first person he's spent any time with in a year and a half.
Right. Okay.
Because he's kind of cut himself off from everybody because he struggles so much with who he feels, and he feels worthless. And, and I think that it just gives me a lot more to do with the story. And it does make that sense of identity. I think it's like what a lot of people struggle with is that, we've all had those moments you walk into like a party and you're like, I don't belong here at all. And that's his life, is that everybody just sees him as this murdering machine, and he really just wants people to see him as something more because he is. So I quite like playing with that stuff. I think it gives the story more depth, but you've still got all the genre stuff if you want to. There's plenty of like people in animal masks stabbing each other, so I cover all the bases if I can.
It's a win-win. Well, thank you so much for coming on, David. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And so I was saying, like, the first part's out now, isn't it?
Yeah, so it'll be up on my web store. So I was waiting until I had all my fulfillment done before I started selling to people. So it should be up on the web store in March. It's March, almost March. It'll be up in the first week of March, and people can buy the PDFs. They won't be able to get the print copies unless they come and ask me specially. Because Yeah, well, I'm just trying to keep them as limited as possible, and I'd probably also like a few more for the next campaign, so I don't want to reorder another batch. But they are there. If you want to find me on Twitter, I'm easily found at DF Taylor Comics.
Well, if you have any questions for David, make sure to find them on Twitter, and make sure to keep an eye on Kickstarter for Volume 2 and Volume 3 of Wild Nature. Thank you so much for coming on, man, and I will see you next time. Cheers, man. Thank you so much.